Build 'em, collect 'em, trash 'em. Robopon is the story of a young lad named Cody, or Corey, who, upon his grandfather's retirement, suddenly has the family business thrust upon him. They're involved in Robopon dispatching, kind of wholesalers, I guess. But it seems Pops is also a bit of an inventor, creating the pons in his spare time. Okay, but what are Robopon, you might ask? Well, yeah, they're essentially Pokemon, but robotic. Now let's try to leave the obvious associations and callbacks to that franchise to the Game Freak yes-men Nintendo Power, who, back in the day, absolutely panned this game without seemingly even playing it, calling it a blatant ripoff and shameless in their totally unbiased review of it. In a nice and in-depth 2-paragraph overview, they barely touch on the actual game at all, instead writing a list of things that look the same as Pokemon Red and Blue, including the font, which isn't actually the same at all, and claiming there's a group of trainers called the Elite Eight, which is actually the name of the competitors in a tournament in Robopon. It's that old chestnut that I've talked about before, that when a game becomes basically genre-defining, everything that comes after that is immediately a clone of that thing, and somehow less valuable because of that. You can use it as a description by all means, say Metroidvania, Doom clone, roguelike, that sort of thing. People automatically know what you mean. It's when the terms become derogatory that they're less useful and kind of lazy, honestly. Not every game can reinvent the wheel, can it? Anyway, enough. If I was writing this for Nintendo Power back in the day, I could give this game a 2 out of 5, write a witty tagline such as and just move on. We've got 3 other reviews to fit onto this 2-page spread after all. Having said all of that, there are a lot of comparisons that you'll just have to look past if you want to enjoy Robopon for what it is. In this industrial, futuristic world of Porombo, you need to find, catch, and train robots, with the ultimate goal of making your company the best in the world by defeating rival companies and becoming the ultimate Robopon champion. It's a light-hearted narrative for sure, far from complex, but that's not really the aim. There are more than 150 different robots to collect. Are we going to comment on whether they chose that number deliberately? No? Although this is heavily hampered in the US version of the game, to the point where it's virtually an unattainable goal to actually collect them all. Originally, the game was released in Sun and Star versions, with 2 later games coming as well in Japan. However, Atlus opted to only release the one version in North America and didn't bother to add in the version-exclusive robots from the other ones. I think you can trade from the Japanese carts, but don't quote me on that, and besides, no one's doing that in the year 2000. As you train, robots gain experience points and level up, with their stats like health or attack power increasing. Each robot has their own unique abilities, but these aren't learned by leveling up. You buy parts from stores and install them onto the machines. These come in 2 forms, the attack weapons like arms or claws or whatever, then the elemental skills that are type-based. You can combine this software as well. If you install a punch part onto your robot and then install a thunder software on top of that, you can give your character Thunder Punch. You can even mix elemental software. Fire and thunder moves mixed together make the Zap special move. A similarly deep mechanic that'll take some learning is the typing system. It's varied, but with fairly cryptic strengths and resistances. Sure, it's obvious why water might be strong against fire, but what's the difference between light and sun, or water and sea? At the end of battles, you are quite handsomely rewarded. You'll get money and experience points, but also random consumables like health regens or the magnets that you use to catch robots, meaning you're not likely to have to spend all of your cash in shops buying all that stuff. You'll also get a random amount of what's called energy balls. These can be given to any robot that can still evolve. Once you get this number maxed out, take it to a laboratory. These labs are quite versatile in what you can do there, as well as just evolving robots. They work similarly to how your home company's warehouse works. You can ask them to craft new robots for you and even invest in the companies so that they have more capital to produce better ones. If you've caught some absolute junkers, you can actually flog them off for scrap in a way that would be a little too poachery if it were animals you were dealing with. There are a couple of, I don't know if you'd call them bugs or bad scripting or whatever, but a couple of odd exploits that let you get a real head start straight off. Outside of the first dungeon, there's a trainer that you can fight infinitely. Just click on her again. She's really easy, gives you money and energy balls after winning, and you can really easily get over-leveled very quickly. You'll be able to get enough energy to evolve your starter straight away, making the first portion of the game an absolute joke. A similar thing happens in that first dungeon. There's a particular monster down there that does that thing where, you know in Pokemon, if a monster is over-leveled, it'll often just ignore its trainer and do random things or loaf off. Well, there's a wild robot down there that is too high a level to listen to itself. It'll ignore its own orders, get confused and attack itself, all that daft stuff, and you can either catch or knock it out with no danger. It's a strong robot initially as well once you get it trained and evolved. There are instances like this scattered throughout the game that damage the balance just a little bit. You can ignore them of course, but they're not the sort of things that you would notice in a more polished game or pair of games. Graphically, it's very middle of the road. Backgrounds and so on look just fine, but what you're really looking for with one of these is some interesting monster design, and these are hit and miss. Some have character about them, but others are very generic. The guy I ended up using for most of the early game was literally just a cartoon robot like one you'd see in Dexter's Laboratory or something. Definitely more imagination was needed. The music is pretty decent though, especially the battle scenes. Menuing, text progression and all that is quite uncomfortable is the best way I can put it. There's an input lag between pressing the button and the text moving along or the attack option changing. It's minute but very noticeable, especially when trying to get through a dungeon. The amount of random encounters is overwhelming anyway, but to have to cursor over to the escape option each time is harder than it needs to be because of how slow and laggy the menuing is. It's hard to explain, you need to experience it. What's not hard to explain is the battle animation. Once you've had your fill of these, I'd definitely recommend turning it off because they're so long. Each attack, especially if you use the MP based ones, takes a good 5 or 6 seconds or even more, and they're not that visually impressive honestly. An area where Hudson did try to innovate somewhat is actually in their cartridges. We've seen their GB Kiss thing before in some of the Japanese versions of games. Pokemon Trading Card Game actually has it, as does some late Game Boy games like Nectaris or Bomberman. It's essentially an infrared thing like what was built into GBC consoles anyway, but you could trade or battle using it. As well as that, you could apparently power up your robots by pointing a TV remote control or something at the scanner. Don't know if it worked or whether anyone even bothered to use it. It's not as if this game is particularly hard that you would need it. There was also a real-time clock in the game, which is needed to evolve certain Robopon at certain times of the day. The starter you get given is actually dependent on what you input as your birthday, so if there's something really cool you want to run with, you can look that up I guess. Also, events in-game are time sensitive, forcing players to pay attention to when they turn the game on. If something important happened when your game was off, you could even get a little alarm to let you know. There was a Tamagotchi game that did the same thing if I remember rightly. They're all features that exist, but they don't really feel particularly well implemented, engaging, or even necessary. So yeah, okay, let's get back to the salient point here. It's definitely a Pokemon clone, one of the more blatant ones. It comes incredibly close to tipping over the edge into Nintendo Power ripoff territory. Very close. Putting lines like "I pick you" in there, saying that your robots evolve instead of get upgraded or something, and calling your tournament the Elite 8 really doesn't help. I mean, you could have chosen some other words that weren't quite so synonymous with Pokemon. But hey, look, it's not a bad game. At least you can still have a good time with Robopon if you can just push all of that stuff to the back of your mind. And at least I gave the review more than 2 paragraphs.